Welcome to Leadership Explored, the podcast where we dive into what it really means to lead in today's world. Every episode, we break down leadership challenges, workplace culture, and the strategies that help professionals navigate an ever-changing world of work. I'm Ed Schaefer, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Andy Siegmund. Have you ever heard someone say, "I never have time to do real work"? Well, today we're diving into a hidden leadership truth. It's all the work. Too often, people see some parts of their job as real work and treat everything else, reporting, planning, documentation, teamwork, as distractions or side tasks. But the reality is, all of it matters. If you only do the parts you like, you're not just hurting yourself, you're limiting your growth, your team's success, and your leadership potential. So Andy, have you noticed this mindset in any teams you've worked with, where only certain types of work get valued? And what do you think drives that?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty ubiquitous problem. We see it a lot in the software industry where folks are, think that the work is exclusively coding, right? If I'm not writing code, I'm not doing the work, and everything else is BS. I should just be out there, writing code, but building a widget, if you will. And you know, I think I think the root of it is pretty deep. So I was thinking a lot about this, when we decided that we were going to have this conversation, Ed. And I think a huge part of this is it's kind of the iceberg theory, right? So like we see the thing. So like let's take writing code, right? We see writing code, and that's the most visible part of the work, and that's what everyone wants to focus on because it's the most visible thing. But we don't see everything that's below the waterline, right? I think a good analogy would be to look at, say, professional athletes, right? You see the game, but you don't see all the work that happens leading up to the game, right? You don't see the time in the gym. You don't see the team practices. You don't see, watching tape and studying the other team's setup. And I think that we end up taking that mindset and applying it to work of like work should always be game day, not preparation for game day. And I think that's where things get a little bit muddled, and how folks start to over index for the most obvious, the most visible part of their job without recognizing all of the supporting infrastructure that makes that possible.
Yeah, and I think what really strikes me about how sneaky this mindset is we don't usually say it out loud, but it does show up all the time. And real work becomes code for output, like you said, deliverables, the decisions, the visible progress, and everything else, which I would say is the stuff that actually makes that output possible, gets treated like a distraction by a lot of people. But I think leadership isn't just about the parts you like. It's not just doing what feels important. It's stewarding the whole ecosystem of work. So if you start picking and choosing, then gaps are going to form and dependencies will break and people will get frustrated. And I've seen it a lot of times where resentment starts to build up because no one wants to carry the invisible load while everyone else is working on glory projects or getting attention for, delivering, like the example you gave, some software or something like that. So yeah, I mean, the real work, in my mind, it includes documentation, planning, reporting, reflecting, collaborating. It's like all the connective tissue that really does make everything else possible. Um, and when I've seen this get ignored, I think the thing I see is that failure points get introduced, right? Deadlines slip or handoffs get dropped, or we wind up redoing work we already did because no one took time to clarify or make sure that the work was already taken care of. And that's why I say it's all the work, the reporting, the prep, the coordination. That's what builds trust. And all the work is what builds resilience and long-term success, not just personal wins. So I guess when you think about teams that really thrived versus ones that struggled, how much of a role do you think this mindset played in the difference?
Yeah, and it's definitely not insignificant, right? I think what you kind of called out there is that the reporting, the prep, the coordination builds trust. And when we're talking about these things, right? Building fast and dirty, whatever it is, right? If you're building software or you're building a house, um, anyone can kind of do that, right? Like that's not the hard thing. And I think we often over glorify that as like the hard thing. The hard thing is knowing what to build, right? So it's all that subterranean work that figures out what to do, right? So the hard thing, if we use like the house analogy, the hard thing is not framing the house, it's architecting the house so that it doesn't fall after you frame it, right? Like that's the deep thinking work, right? The framing it is like that's following the plan that's been laid out for you. And this applies to software, it applies to everything that we build, right? So yeah, I think that the teams that get themselves into the most trouble or have the poorest results are sort of doing, ready, fire, aim, right? They're not following the process. They're not going through everything they need to do to make sure that what they're building is actually going to go and deliver value. They're just kind of out hoping for the best. They're saying, hey, I can do the cool part of this. Like I can do the parlor trick, but there's no substance behind it.
Yeah. What I know sometimes, when I've had this conversation with other people, they'll say, "Oh, well, we had success without worrying about these other pieces of work or doing the status report or something." But in my experience, when teams or leaders don't treat planning or communicating or documenting as real work, the consequences may not show up right away, but they will always eventually show up in some fashion. Uh, People start skipping documentation, meetings become something that we do just to survive and not engage in. We wonder why handoffs get messy or why everyone's working overtime just to keep the basics going, or we see quality drop. And I don't think that those things happen because people don't care. It's because alignment starts to break down. The teams get siloed, and people end up working more just to keep the real work alive, what they consider the real work, because now they're doing it after hours and without the support structures they need. And a lot of times this leads to burnout or blame. And suddenly you've got a team that's really busy and everyone's busy all of the time, but they're not connected and maybe they're not getting the results that they were hoping for. And I don't view this as just a team issue. It might be an issue at the team level, but I say behind that, it's probably a leadership issue since leaders model what matters. And if the leaders are only valuing output, that's what they're asking you to report on, or they skip retros or ignore planning or delegate away documentation, people do notice. And then they say, oh, well, that seems okay. That's what other leaders in our organization are doing. So I'm going to start doing the same thing. And now we get even more gaps and more of that connective tissue that's not being handled the way it should be or being taken care of. So what's your thoughts on that? Have you seen leaders model this well or badly? And what kind of ripple effects did you notice across the team as a result of that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good call out, right? That this is truly a leadership issue, right? It's a matter of what we focus on and the attention that we pay to it. And when I think about where this has gone awry is when we start to take things like planning or documentation or roadmap building and treat it sort of like a cargo cult activity, right? So it's like it's a thing that we do, but it's disconnected from the outcome that we're trying to achieve. It becomes you start to see this things kind of unravel over time, just like you were saying. And I think when we fail to focus on what I might call like the subterranean work, you're right. It doesn't break things right away. It's usually a second or third order effect, right? And that I think one of the challenges too is, in our work world, if you're working in a public company, right, or a company that's aspiring to be public, we also have relatively short time horizons, right? We're looking at 90-day time horizons. So oftentimes, not focusing on these things won't impact your quarterly earnings. It won't impact your annual earnings. It'll impact your 5-year plan or your 10-year plan. And let's be realistic. I think a lot of leaders don't last that long at a given organization. So by the time it goes to crap, they've already sailed out off into the sunset, which is another part of it, part of the problem overall. So I kind of to bring it back, I think that like it comes down to understanding why and understanding what we're trying to accomplish as we're trying to move things. And I think it's incumbent upon leaders to connect all of those activities to the outcome and to take them seriously and to take them earnestly and to really drive that as part of the culture and build that from the ground up, that everything that we do is important and this is why it's important and why it's connected. And when we start to lose that connection of the planning is critical even though the plan may not be critical, um, we that's where things start to fall apart, and that's where you start to have these second, third order negative impacts.
Yeah. But yeah, and I thinking about any leaders I've had, I can only think of one in particular who modeled this type of thing really well, and he made sure that it was clear that doing status reporting or cleaning up the backlog or doing those types of things were part of his expectations of the work, and he made sure the team was making space for it, and it wasn't entirely focused on just the results portion or the deliverables portion of it. And for me, at least, I found it to be a really positive effect both for myself and across the team, because now it made me feel like I was able to do that work without it taking away from the more valuable work. And by him just prioritizing that and role modeling that behavior, it made more people on the team embrace that and kind of take it on. And with that reminder of like, hey, everyone, it is all the work. So we do need you to pick. I know you're a developer or an engineer, and doing a status report may not sound that fun, but that is part of your job, and we need you to do it. And they may not have loved it or been happy to be doing it, but they were happy to take on the responsibility because they knew how it contributed and how it added value, and it definitely had a positive ripple effect across the team.
Yeah, and when I think about those things too, Ed, like, so take status reports, for example. Um, I'm in the process of implementing a new portfolio reporting mechanism for my team, and it's twofold. What one is I I need to know what is going on across my portfolio, so the downstream portfolios that I own, right? Because everyone who reports to me, all of their problems are my problems at the end of the day. So I need to be acutely aware. I also need to parse out what's signal and what's noise. So by kind of pushing down a mechanism for my team as to this is how I want you to report it, this is the format I want you to report it in, and these are the questions that I want you to ask because these are the questions I'm going to ask you. What I'm also doing is I'm teaching them to think about their portfolio in a cohesive and coherent way, right? I'm asking them to think about their business and how they run their sector of the business, right? So this eventually, if all plays out the way that it's designed, starts enabling them to do my job in the future, right? Which gives them a growth path. It also, gives me a succession plan, right? Something we should always be thinking about. Um, but the reporting, the purpose is not for creating the report. It's helping you think about the report, right? The report is a mechanism to force you to think coherently about the business that you're in and the impacts that you're having on the business, right? And I think that that's where folks get disconnected, right? You think that the report is an end, like a means to an end, or an end among itself, as opposed to a thought tool for everything, right? So it's not just about, oh, I need to show my boss what I'm doing so he can show his boss what he's doing so she can show her boss what she's doing. It's a mechanism to think about everything that we're doing and make sure that we're actually delivering the results that we're trying to deliver and that we're able to prove it, right? Like that we're able to show that it really happened. And that I think is the mindset shift that we need to have for all of this, as I keep on calling it, kind of subterranean work, right? Like I work in the consulting industry, right? Reporting is not consulting. It's not billable work, right? You could make that argument that like, oh, well, this is non-utilizable work, so it's not valuable work. And what would be far more valuable is to just go out and charge for my time. And that's a coherent argument if you're just trying to flex top line revenue. But if you're trying to flex impact, you need to think about the work that you're doing and the impact that it's having and how you can strategically increase the impact that you're doing in the hours that you are working.
Yeah. But yeah, and so we're what you mentioned is a good place of transition because I'd say we're all wired to gravitate toward what we enjoy. It's kind of natural for us, right? But with leadership, I think leadership is about how you show up even when it's not your favorite part. So you mentioned shifting that mindset. How do we actually shift the mindset? And I think it starts with how we frame the work. Like we said, too often things like reporting and planning and documenting get treated like chores or admin work or stuff to get through so you can get to the real work or the real job. And I think, what if we looked at that work differently? What if planning and documentation weren't a tax, but we treated them like a multiplier? Like we've talked about, something that enables better decisions, clearer execution, stronger teams. What if we saw that work as enabling the team just as much as coding or presenting or closing deals? What if we treated this meta work? I think in some ways it's almost like the meta, it's the work for the work. So, what if we treated those things like reflecting, planning, or reporting as value creating instead? And what if invisible work, like mentoring someone or bridging silos between teams or holding emotional space, what if we recognize that as value generating, and a value generating form of leadership and not just something extra that certain people do? And maybe the mindset shift is, if instead we think, well, if it helps the team succeed or understand what they need to do, then it's part of the work. If it helps the team communicate or understand each other better, it's part of the work. If it helps us communicate to our clients or to the org, then it's part of the work. Before I go further on this idea, what's your take on this? Have you seen people reframe the less glamorous parts of the job in a way that actually worked?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of obliquely talking about servant leadership to a certain degree, and this is something that I think has been maybe a little bit corrupted in our current culture, right? This idea of, call it work-life balance, or like, passion-driven work, or anything like that. And realistically, and tell me if I'm way off base, but like, in my opinion, if you enjoy more than 50% of what you do on a given, daily basis for work, you're doing way better than most, right? Like, there's any job that you have, there's a certain percent, it's usually close to half, if not more than half of your job, that is kind of a grind, right? That's also kind of what the money's for, a little bit. And I think that like shifting the mindset to kind of focus on impact or enabling the things that you really like to do is is really critical. But it's also understanding, like, what pain are you willing to shoulder to do the things that you like to do, right? I think that that's also part of the question, right? So, like, if you look at it cohesively, helping the team, mentoring, doing the status reporting, doing the planning, those are all the things that you need to do the work that you like to do, right? They're all enablers for the thing that you like to do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think about, when I think about that leader who helped reframe the less glamorous parts so that people did want to do them. I think a lot of it tied directly into purpose, where he could show or explain how this connected back, right? And I mean, every task, whether it's updating a spreadsheet or prepping for a one-on-one or spending some time aligning on a roadmap or anything else, it does connect back to something that matters. It might be customer success or your team health or the organizational goals or strategic clarity. It's hard to say exactly what it would be in a specific context, but if you are able to connect it back, then that sense of purpose is what can help lift the unseen parts of the job into something meaningful, and turn this feeling of like, oh, this is maintenance into this is leadership. And I think, as leaders, we can't push that purpose onto other people. The only thing we can do is embody it ourselves. And like we said before, our only option really is modeling the work. We can take part in planning, we can share the documentation. And as leaders, we need to make sure we're not delegating away all of the boring bits just because we think they're boring and because we can delegate them away. If we show ownership on some of those things, or take those types of tasks on in some cases, then it's doing that role modeling and showing the team or the people we work with that this is something they should take on as well. And if you see someone who's quietly keeping the wheels turning behind the scenes, I would say celebrate it, call it out, and recognize the people who are holding things together, like the glue. and not just the ones who are out front. I think that happens a lot, right? The recognition goes to the person who pulled an all-nighter, or the person who was most able to resolve some outage or some issue, but not necessarily the people who made sure that all the systems were in place so that they could succeed. One of the tools I was thinking about here that I think that I like and I think works for this sort of thing is the working genius model, which is Patrick Lencioni, one of his more recent books. And the idea is that it helps teams understand who naturally thrives in different types of work, and for some people, certain types of work is particularly draining. And I think if you use a model like this, then we can figure out, oh, we don't need to force everyone to do everything, and we don't need to force people to do the things that drain them in all cases. So if someone is great at, they have ideas of like galvanizing and enabling in this model. If someone's great at those things, let them own that. And if it's not your strength, then don't take that responsibility on and kind of hoard it and have it stress you out and make it so you can't perform in your same way. Share that load. There's probably somebody else on the team who maybe that's the thing that energizes them, or that's the thing they're best at. Um, and sometimes maybe the best move isn't to power through it at all. And maybe we should make the space and time to automate some of those tasks away. If it's a necessary task, but it's draining, maybe the right answer is to just look for a better system and free people up to do what they do best. And I think, underlying this, the goal, it's not about making sure everyone loves every task, but just making sure that everyone can get the job done, do it well, that we do it together as a team, and that we do it with respect for the whole system. And as leaders, we should just not ask that question only, what did we ship or what happened, but what helped move things forward, and making sure we're honoring planning, alignment, support work. Is the team making space to talk about what all the work actually looks like and who's holding it? Or are we just assuming that it's getting taken care of? Maybe things are missing, or maybe there's gaps that if we talk about them, we can identify them and then make sure we're owning that. Um, if someone is managing all that invisible glue, that's not extra. That is the job. That's the work. And I think we've got to normalize the necessary and be comfortable to say things like, well, we're not behind. We're doing all of this work that adds value to it. So, is there anything that helps shift your mindset, Andy, when you find yourself resisting a task that doesn't feel like the work?
Yeah, and so I know we've talked about this before, right? So my original kind of educational background was in classical music, and I think music is a really good analogy for this sort of dichotomy between like visible work and invisible work. Because when you're a practicing musician, right, you might perform a few hours a week, right? On the whole, right? I'm talking in say the orchestral construct, right? You play 4 or 5 concerts a week. Maybe that's 15 hours that you're actually on stage, and that's the visible work. But your work week is probably more like 50 to 60 hours, and that's because you're practicing. So you're learning your parts. You're rehearsing. You're learning to play your parts with the rest of the ensemble, and you're also trying to get better at your craft, right? So when I'm confronted with something that feels like it's the unsexy part of the work, I like to think about, okay, what am I actually doing? Am I refining my craft? Am I getting myself prepared to go do the thing that I do? So am I practicing? Am I learning a part? Am I rehearsing that part? Or am I on stage? So I like to think about it in that sort of construct. And I find that that can be really, really helpful when we're doing things, right? Because you can't you can't just be on stage 100% of your working time. It doesn't work that way, right? If you're a sales rep, you're prepping for your sales call far more than you're on the sales call, right? If you're on the sales call for 100% of your working hours, your sales calls are probably going to be pretty bad, right? You're going to have to prep, right? You're learning about the industry, right? You're putting together your presentation, you're doing all of that work. Yeah, it's the sales call that pays your bills, but it's everything else that supports your ability to pay your bills. So I like to think about it, Ed, in that sort of kind of coherent system, and try to understand how these things are interconnected, and why it is that they matter, right? So the preparation for the meeting, if you're a leader, right, it's setting the tone, right? It's making sure that if I'm going to ask for, you know, 10 person hours of time to do a team meeting, I'm using that time effectively and I'm not just showing up and winging it, right? It's making sure that everything you do has the maximum impact that you can create with it. So I don't know, that's kind of the way I think about it as far as, prep and tasks that don't feel like the work, if you will. I think it's really important to understand how it's all, it's all part of the same picture.
Yeah. And I guess for me, when I find myself resisting something, the first thing I try to ask is, where is this resistance coming from? Why am I resisting it? It might be because it's not my strength, or it's one of those tasks that it feels draining for me. That's possible. But for me, a lot of the times I resist the task because I don't understand why I'm doing it or what the value is behind it. So
Mhm.
I tend to ask, why are we doing this? What's behind this? What's the value? If it's a status report or an extra slide in a PowerPoint deck, it's like, well, who's going to look at this, or what is this used for? And if I can get answers to those questions, then that usually helps me quell that resistance and feel like, okay, even though I don't like this, I can get it done and move forward because I see the value in it. But sometimes if I'm not able to get a clear answer as to what the value is, I may find that resistance growing. And in my opinion, that's a time to evaluate, is this really a valuable task? Is this just busy work? Or, is this something we should continue to be doing going forward? So something we talked about briefly earlier that I wanted to dig in a little bit more is uh, why this really matters at the leadership level. And we kind of talked about this a little bit, but when leaders devalue any part of the work, whether it's intentional or not, they're giving permission to everyone else to do the exact same thing. And that is going to create a slow erosion where standards are slipping, or the coordination weakens, or the team cohesion just starts to fall apart. And people do start to hedge, right? They'll avoid the tasks they know won't be recognized, or the ones that they don't see visibly as getting the attention and that sort of thing. A lot of times people will start to do the bare minimum on those things that don't get visibility. And that does compound over time. And eventually it'll affect your results. If you're putting off the documentation as you're building some software solution, and then you have to scramble at the end to try to pull all the documentation together, that winds up spreading that work out, and you're not delivering what you need to on time. Whereas if you are able to kind of pull those pieces closer to when they're happening, then it's not going to be something that piles up on you at the end, and you're kind of able to chip away at it piece by piece. And so I think that kind of mindset is something that really matters for leaders to model. If a leader is skipping team events or the documentation, or complaining about meetings even, then others will see that as permission to do the same thing. And then the leader might wonder, why are we misaligned, or why does it feel like we're always rushing at the last minute? Well, it's because the culture of the organization or of the team was shaped in those small choices. And so I think the teams that I've ever seen that thrive, they're the ones where every part of the work gets treated with respect. It's not just delivery, not just performance reviews, not just the demos, but all those things: planning, reflection, maintenance. People may not love coming to a retro, but they still come and they bring themselves and they contribute and share the things that were on their mind. And those behind the scenes efforts, they wind up actually keeping things moving in a much more effective way in every case that I've ever seen. And then I think, we're talking a lot about teams and the leadership and the organization, but just to look at the individual level for somebody who's like, well, what's in it for me? I think something we don't talk about enough is that the people who tend to rise in their careers and ultimately earn real trust and opportunities are the ones who show up for all the work. They're not just there doing just the flashy stuff or just the heroic saves. They're doing all the uncelebrated things that make the rest of the team better. And I think that earns respect at all levels, from the team to leadership, and it builds credibility over time, and it ultimately helps their career and their long-term prospects. Um, so I know I mentioned a leader I worked with who modeled this kind of leadership mindset really well. Have you, Andy, ever worked with someone who modeled this well, and what kind of impact did it have?
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough that I'm working for one at the moment, and I've worked for her before, and she's had this track record where there's kind of a cast of characters that'll kind of come and follow her from role to role. And I think you're right, right? It's when you're working for a leader who focuses on all the work, it's it makes it a much more interesting and a much kind of safer place to be. And also it's the type of setup that usually builds a ton of trust overall, right? um and I think that that can be really helpful for you as an individual, right? If you're working for someone like that, or if you're trying to build an organization with that, because when you are trustworthy, when you're showing that you're willing to get your hands dirty but also willing to delegate and actively delegating, um, you more frequently will have people who want to work for you, right? And I feel like that is an undervalued thing, right? Is being able to create a culture where people want to be on your team, where people are actively choosing to be on your team. And you see this across industries. Very effective leaders, you'll find a new leader comes into an organization, and within 6 or 8 months, a handful of people who've worked with them previously show up in that same organization. And you can denigrate that and be like, oh, this is nepotism or any of these sorts of things. But I think it's usually indicative of really solid and really strong leadership, right? That people are willing to follow a leader from one place to another because they know that they're going to like have growth opportunities. They know that they're going to go and they're going to get things done, and they know that there's going to be consistency in expectations and in outcomes, right? And you see it all over, like all the time. And usually, when you see it, it's not just what I would call like distressed assets who are following these folks around of like, oh man, I really needed a job right now, and I got lucky and I made a couple of phone calls and they gave. No, it's like people leaving really solid roles to go follow a leader from place to place. And I think that that always comes from like a core background of trust, delegation, and understanding that we're all trying to do this cohesive thing, right? We're going to all bring our various strengths to the table, we'll level them out, and we're going to go and we're going to get stuff done, and we're going to look at it from a whole picture point of view.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe someone's out there listening and they're thinking, maybe I have a little bias about what I consider to be real work. So let's talk about some things they could do to start shifting that. I think the first step is just having awareness. Start noticing where you feel resistance. Is there a part of your job you rush through or avoid or secretly think this shouldn't be my job? And I'd say if so, that's a signal and it's a chance to try something different. So I'd say a couple experiments that you could try is pick one less visible task and treat it like a craft. Treat it like something you're trying to grow in or become more skilled in, and that you want to become proud to do it well. And that could help take that thing that feels like it's not as important and elevate it for you. Another one would be publicly recognizing someone else's contribution to the behind the scenes work. Sometimes just calling it out and saying, "Hey, that was awesome," and making sure that they know that that contribution was appreciated and that other people are aware that the contribution they made to the not real work was something that was important, and that'll start modeling that behavior and encouraging more people to do it. And then the last thing I would say is just reflect on a regular kind of cadence and see what changes for me when I treat all the work as real work. So if there is something that you don't like or you tend to avoid, when you shift that mindset and start viewing it as real work that has value, does that change something inside of yourself to make it easy for you? So there's some of the ideas that I had. How about you, Andy? If you show up and work is feeling like a grind, but you know it still matters, how do you stay committed and fully show up to do that work anyway?
So I think that there are a couple of things about that that are critical to think of. Um, One, at just like a really high level, is that i- if you're rushing through something, right? Oftentimes we find the thing that we don't like to do, and we rush through it. We do a crappy job to get it over with, right? This is the child who doesn't want to vacuum the house as one of their chores. They just like do a bad job of it and try to get it done as quickly as possible. I think if you find yourself rushing through something, right, and you're not under a time constraint, like if you understand, like, hey, I'm rushing through this because I don't like doing this thing, slow down. Try to do it well. Just try to do the best possible job that you can, and you can experiment with this in really small settings, right? I don't know very many people who like doing dishes. Try one night just really deliberately doing the dishes. Don't put on a podcast, don't put on music, just sit there and focus on doing the dishes. You're probably going to find that it's pretty enjoyable to do the dishes if you just focus on the task at hand, right? If you just say, "Hey, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to do the best job I can doing the dishes." That's one way that you can kind of shift things. And the other parts are, I think, just kind of holistic mindset things, right? So there's this saying, you hear it especially in the arts, right? That amateurs work when they're inspired, professionals just get up and go to work every day, right? So if you're a writer, if you're an amateur writer, you write when you feel inspired, right? The muse has struck you and I'm going to sit down and write. If you're a professional and you write a book or two a year, you probably keep banker's hours. And at 9 a.m., you're sitting down, you're going to write 2 crummy pages a day, and you're going to keep on doing that until you have a book or your article or whatever the heck it is. Right. So I think part of it is the mindset of like, do I want to be a professional today? Or do I want to be an amateur today? Right. Am I waiting on inspiration to do the things that I need to do? Or am I doing these things because this is the thing that I do? Right. And I think that that's just part of like at a certain point, like we just kind of have to put on our big guy or big girl pants and grow up and go to work and do the work, right? I think especially in our culture, we're pretty heavily motivated by kudos or likes on Instagram or what have you. And I think every time I hear people complain about the unrecognized work or the unsexy work, I'm reminded of this scene from Mad Men where I think it's Peggy yells at Don Draper that a thank you would be nice every once in a while, and he yells back at her, "That's what the money's for." Right. And, not saying we should idealize Don Draper as a leader in any way, shape, or form, but he's also directionally correct when he's talking about this, right? Like it is a job, it is work. Like there is satisfaction in doing it. There should be satisfaction in a job well done, but every part of it isn't expected to be fun. And if it was, they probably won't pay you for it. So, just remember remember that kind of at the end of the day, like when you're doing the things that you don't like to do, try to do it well because a thing done well is more satisfying than a thing done poorly. And also, they are paying you for this effort right now. That's kind of the basic brass tacks of a job. Sorry if that's a little too brutal.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sometimes the brutal truths do feel a little brutal, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. It could be misused or weaponized, but I know the idea of professionalism does really land with me and stick with me for years now. When I heard that years ago, there's something I do think about a lot. Is this idea? The truth is that showing up for all the work, even the parts you don't love, isn't about checking a box. It is about being a professional. It's not just doing the work when it's fun or visible, but doing what needs to be done, even when no one's watching, even when it's not your favorite part, or even if you wake up and you don't feel like doing it today and you do it anyway, because that's what real leadership really looks like, I would say. Yeah, so to wrap us up for today, here's what we explored. A lot of people talk about real work like it's only the output, the code, the decisions, the deliverables. But leadership isn't just about the outcomes, it's about everything that makes those outcomes possible. Planning, reporting, documenting, collaborating, learning, reflecting, supporting your team, mentoring someone, holding space in a tough meeting. That stuff is not extra. That's not a distraction. It's all the work. We talked about how skipping the non glamorous parts creates failure points, how culture suffers when leaders model selective effort, and why honoring the full scope of the job isn't just good leadership, it's sustainable leadership. And here's the truth: you don't rise to the level of your favorite tasks, you rise to the level of how you show up for everything. So here's your challenge this week, listeners. Pick one task you usually rush through or avoid entirely. Slow down. Treat it like part of your craft. And ask yourself, what work do I devalue that actually deserves respect? What work does my team do that's essential but invisible? Where am I resisting parts of my work? And what would change if I honored them instead? We'd love to hear how this shows up in your leadership, what you've learned, challenged, or changed. Email us at leadershipexplored@gmail.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. Thanks for exploring leadership with us today on Leadership Explored. We release new episodes every other Tuesday. Be sure to follow, share with a colleague, and until next time, keep leading with purpose.